Welcome to another episode of the Under the Pines podcast. I'm your host, Max Emanuel. Today's guest is Rahim Taghizadegan. He is a deep thinker, economist, Bitcoin specialist, author of 15 books, philosopher, professor, and father. We talked about education, unschooling, fatherhood, AI, Bitcoin, location independence, Fiat, and so many more interesting topics. He's actively working on solutions to some of these problems out there, which is, why I'm very grateful that we were able to find the time to record this episode. So thank you for investing the time to listen in on this. I really do hope you get value out of this conversation. So feel free to give some feedback in the comments and like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon. Hello, Rahim.
Good morning.
Hi. So I think we met a year ago, more or less. Yeah, pretty accurate. And, since then you've been on my list of guests. So I'm very happy that we finally made it work. And yeah, you're an Austrian economist that's, into Austrian economics, which is always a funny way of phrasing it. But, you're also a father, and maybe I want to start there. Like, how did fatherhood change your way you operate in the world and your perspective on life?
Oh, I think it's one of the most important experiences one can have to get a better grasp of reality. So I've been dabbling in Austrian economics because I want to understand the world and get a grasp of reality. So I think it's alongside of reading thousands, 10,000s of books, maybe having children is just at that importance. It conveys, some deep truths and essences about our existence. It's a really kind of practical learning experience, which changes your life. It's something beautiful and meaningful to it. Interestingly, the members of the Austrian school, and in particular the Austrian traditions of psychology, get an early grasp how important meaning is, and if there is a lack of meaning, how it will be substituted by these pseudo-political religions and false narratives and stuff. So I think having something meaningful like kids in your life is really important there as well, to not go astray and seek for false utopias or false promises. Of course, it also changes your meta of work. It has restricted my output in writing. That's, I think, one of the opportunity costs of having children. But fortunately, I had written lots of books before. I've written more than 15 books already. So I think it's okay to take a little break here. And having kids has pushed me onto other projects, which I hope will be even more meaningful than writing books.
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's one of these things that, especially for us men, it's one of these big pillars of life, right? I think the way we operate changes drastically. The way we think about the future changes drastically. I think we make better decisions, right? Maybe not always in a monetary sense, but for the whole, the good of the whole, I think it's always the better decision. That is, if you're into being a parent, if you actually, love your children and your partner and stuff like that, right? Like if you, just focus on monetary output, like a lot of people out there, and, you basically don't care what happens on the side, then, it's a different story. But let's go back a bit. Like you've studied physics with a focus on nuclear physics.
And
a long time
complex
ago.
systems, yeah.
Yeah, a long time ago. How come you didn't end up in that sphere? Because you also went to education later, and maybe if you want to talk about that a bit, like why did you do that switch into education at some point?
Well, I've grown up in Austria and lived in Austria, and Austria has demolished its own nuclear industry much earlier than Germany had done. So Austria is the only country that really constructed its a whole nuclear power plant and then just didn't shut it on. And so it remained as a museum and for some film sets, which at the time there was really a lot of panicking, and it was probably a similar mood to today when they stopped it. So there wasn't much the future and for a nuclear physicist in Austria. And then I also figured out I was always driven into physics by this desire to learn about the world and reality and really figure out things. Then in practical physics, it's of course a highly divided division of labor. So you're looking at a fairly small aspect of reality. And that seemed a bit daunting then. And it's really hard to know if you're at the pioneering edge of something, and it's hard to see your contribution. I started in my career in space research, which seemed great, of course, but also in Europe, space research was a bit more done by committees and agencies, and they had a more bureaucratic spirit, I thought. So it didn't feel like a pioneering endeavor. It felt great for a while. But then I mean, what drove me into physics was really an interdisciplinary interest. I thought physics is the most basic science, dealing with the simplest phenomena. And maybe I was not patient enough. My interest then went on to the more complex phenomena. And I realized that they are more intertwined. It's even physics has big challenges in coping with complex systems. And then I just saw, oh my God, at least the physicists are a bit humble about it and they know that. And then I saw in the social sciences how people feel in a kind of cargo cult, just like repeating the appearances of the scientific method, they would become or get the status of engineers and become social engineers. And that was really a big calling there. And like looking at social sciences, I then studied economics and sociology as well. And there was just such a huge gap because they use one strategy, which likely you bluff people by using lots of mathematics and scientific looking stuff. So if you really had figured out your maths and the natural sciences, you were very hard to fool there. And I think that gave me a bit of an edge in these fields. And I just saw, oh my God, those areas are really important. They really matter. They are much more of a lever. You know, in physics, if you are lucky, you contribute a little bit to a small technology, which is just the means to be used. In the social sciences, it's all about the ends, how you want to design society and stuff like that. That has a crazy leverage. It's like wrong social sciences can lead to mass murder and mass starvation, and good social sciences leads to flourishing. So unfortunately, even though physics is the base of understanding society and politics is the base of anything else, and even doing physics, doing natural sciences, doing technology, being allowed to do technology. So there I saw, okay, I have kind of advantage there, having an interest in social phenomena because they're the more complex phenomena, and having a very good solid background in maths and the methods of the natural sciences, and seeing that kind of leverage that's there, I just felt a calling, and then I discovered these Austrian traditions, which of course for me was more prevalent as I had grown up in Austria. And then the big surprise was that the Austrian School of Economics I only discovered in the US as a living tradition. And that was very odd. I had studied economics in Austria, but hadn't, I had heard about Hayek, the Nobel laureate and stuff like that, but I was never taught that it's really a relevant tradition. It was like a footnote in the history books, kind of thing, which of course is all of the past and not scientific anymore. And then I saw that there are actually intelligent people still pursuing it as an active tradition. And it triggered my interest. And then later on, I could connect it to the other traditions. I was lucky to still learn from the other Austrian schools. There are quite a few other Austrian schools, and there were fewer remaining very old professors left at the time when I was a student. Economics had disappeared completely because it's the politically most relevant science. So politicians, even after the war, tried everything to prevent that tradition from coming back to Austria. But other traditions had barely survived. They are all disappeared by now. So I have left Vienna as well. It's just, unfortunately, just a museum. It's a beautiful museum. But these traditions, I figured, okay, if they matter, and I think they matter, I have to continue those, and that's what I try to do. I try to continue this interdisciplinary tradition. So I'm, in that sense, maybe an educator, but I don't really believe that much in education as it's done. So it's more like, if you want to learn something, then it should inspire other people to follow your suit and learn. But I don't really feel it like teaching and telling you the answers and giving you quick recipes or stuff like that. That kind of thing that's usually associated with education.
Yeah. Yeah, that's also interesting with kids, right? Because I think then we really learn what works and what doesn't if you're conscious, right? Because like just putting a piece of paper in front of them is not going to work, right? Like you have to you have to live it. You have to show them the path, right? And I think that's also the problem I had in education, because I just needed like guidance, I would say, and not just learning by heart. And I think that's just a problem with it. But then again, we can also go into that, like it's designed that way. Right. It's designed that way that it's uninteresting. It's designed that way that people don't excel at something and they're not interested enough to actually pursue, these different niches and stuff. Like, what's your take on that? Do you feel like, we can change anything about that, like ourselves? Do you feel like, homeschooling is the way? What do you think?
Oh, it's a symptom of society, and we have to remember how this kind of centralized, nationalized education emerged, and its primary purpose was producing cannon fodder. It's like people that are used to standing in line and following as they are told. That was the explicit purpose of the early schooling, and then producing a homogeneous society that also fits in the pattern of the centralized nation state. So that was very much linked to societal and political purposes. And they are still there. Most people are unconscious about it. And partly, of course, our society now seems to be less military. It has become this big churning welfare, not so much warfare state in European societies. So it's more of producing functioning functionaries or clerks. So also people that don't care that much about the meaning of what they're doing, but are able to follow a guidance and do as they're told. And of course, they're great people in education, and there is a function of even that institutional education. But the main function is a kind of kindergarten. It's like keeping the kids more or less secure so that the parents can go on earning money and paying taxes. And of course, as has been crucial, that most women are part of the workforce now, and most men, of course, have always been. And that's also in the interest, of course, of those structures, having enough taxpayers that don't ask too many stupid questions. And I mean, I wouldn't panic about that. So in the early years, in most places, kids are fairly safe. Okay, the biggest danger is really that they lose their interest in learning. That's the worst thing.
Yeah.
But with kids getting older now, even other dangers appear. So I don't think you can consider your kids safe anymore in most schools after a certain age, because for the peer group and the children and other parents and the teachers, the least, you have lots of very toxic mental ideas, models, concepts, and then also physical harm can arise, psychological harm can arise. So for now, it's just functioning because most parents assume it's a pretty safe way to store away your kids.
Yeah, storing away is a good way of phrasing it. I think I see a big problem with that, and I think that that's the root of a lot of issues that we have in society, right? That we're not functioning in a proper family unit, right? That there's always like a parent missing, and either it's the father or the mother or both, and then education happens by people that do not care that much about your children, right? They don't oftentimes care about themselves. So how are they going to care about like someone else, right? Like it's impossible. So I think this is the root cause of a lot of issues that we have, and so at least I try, with also with this podcast, to talk about these topics more, because I think parents don't think about this enough, and they don't think enough about the issues that can arise, like you just described, with other kids being around them that have these issues, and they carry them with them and they just copy them, right? Because that's that age, like that young age of a child is where they copy stuff. They just see and they think it's good. They don't even know, the repercussions of it, or the negativities that could arise because of that. And so I think it's very important to, either you find a good school, and there's not a lot of, good programs out there, I would say. And I mean, for example, for me at the moment, it's impossible yet. I'm in a very secluded place, right? There's like no Waldorf in sight, right? And no forest, I don't know, school or kindergarten in sight, right? I'm not saying that later on it could be something else, but like for children between the age of 3 and let's say 9, I think these institutions are not the best way. so so do you think homeschooling is a way, or what would you say, like how can we get out of this? Because I mean, obviously not everybody can make it work, right? Like always the big argument there is money. The big argument is, we have to be the breadwinners. We need the money, right? But then again, they pay 50% tax, and effectively in the end, it's probably more like 75, that goes to the government. And nobody thinks about, just changing that base layer, right? Like what's your take on that?
Exactly. Right now we have the situation in most of Western Europe that actually one parent just works for the state, that then maybe even pays that parent. So something that's not as meaningful as caring for your family. So no matter if it's the woman or the man, but yeah, that's the status quo. So one way is to escape that kind of hamster wheel, and the way that has seemed most feasible is become a perpetual tourist, and get rid of that status as a tax-paying citizen. Now that has worked for quite a while. It was also the concept proposed by the sovereign individual, the book that also had Bitcoin as a kind of early prophecy in mind, the magic internet money, they called it. And they saw quite early, the authors, those trends. And some practical proponents of the Austrian school were also very early in understanding those trends, the shift of increasing leverage of mobility, and how difficult it will be for the base model of the stationary bandit, we call it in social sciences, being able to control an immobile population once technology and digital connections and so on make people more mobile, and and change the production structure over time. So more and more location independent professionals have become possible, and that has opened a window, and lots of people are using that. Is still a relatively small proportion, but in total numbers, it's impressive. And in particular for Western European countries, there's so many Germans, for example, that are either thinking about leaving Germany, have left Germany. And of course, one thing is that immense dead weight that you carry for an apparatus that obviously is not working. You don't even get now infrastructure for all the money. It's like nothing. It sucks. And a second reason, the second most important reason, and for some, the first most important reason, is really coercion in education. Is that in Germany, the police will come and get your kid if you don't get the kid to the designated propaganda institutes. And that's an issue. And so the answer there, of course, right? You have a kind of material base for that. How can you escape that lifestyle that you're bound, because probably you even have credit. You have to pay down your credit on the home that you live at. You have two jobs that are linked to an economy that it's more and more controlled by political whims. And it's really the worst kind of existence. And I've heard many dramatic stories, and they always make you cry as a parent. I've talked to many families that are really stuck in that kind of metrics. It's like, We,
Yeah.
no savings, it's just down payments to have a roof over your head. And then, of course, you have no choice. There's the school you send your kid to, and it's the closest one usually. And that's how it works. So once you can escape that kind of metrics, then still there are issues, of course. Mobility is not an end in itself; it's a means, and it will bring challenges. In particular, as children are social learners, I think the worst idea is to pack them together with a peer group of kids of the exact same age and the exact same background who don't want to be at the same place at the
Yeah.
same time. That's the worst kind of learning, and it
Yeah.
more resembles a prison. The better kind of learning is mixed age groups, of course, and the least coercion you can have possible, and it's just kids playing together. That's the natural way of learning.
Exactly.
But kids need other kids to play or long for them because it's part of the learning process. So this can get a challenge if you're mobile. So I've seen even German families, they do what they call world schooling. They just go on endless travels with their kids. And for a while, it's a great experience if the family unit works really well. If you have some issues, then you'll stress out and freak out. And that makes it impossible. And I've seen families split about, of course, all the little decisions you have to take. And if you're not absolutely sure about your partner and you have doubts here and there, or what have we done, and you have left that secure position there, and now it's this issue arises, and what about illness and so on, and all the stuff, all those doubts, that makes it really difficult. So then, of course, you try to get together with groups, potentially. I wouldn't advise to go for homeschooling, because homeschooling usually means schooling at home, and that comes from some jurisdictions allowed you to do education at home if you can prove that the kids are learning the right stuff. So it's all curriculum based. So homeschoolers usually tend to have curricula. I know one jurisdiction well, it was Austria. Austria was for a long time one of the few jurisdictions where homeschooling was legal. It's still legal, but you need to take an exam every year. And now that's where the trouble starts. There's a lot of pressure on that exam. If you fail it, you have to redo the whole year in a traditional school. So there's a lot of pressure on parents and kids. That changes your life model completely. And they have made it much worse because during the pandemic, lots of parents chose homeschooling. And the government and the media more or less pointed the finger and said, oh, probably those are people who don't believe in the pandemic measures. They may be Nazis even. So let's be really strict about who's doing that. And they outlawed groups, which is crazy. So you were not allowed to do homeschooling in a group anymore because that would be considered a school without a license. And then they made the exams really worse. So you had to go to a public school, the worst kind of public school with the worst kind of frustrated public bureaucrats taking the exams and figuring out if your kid has done all the right thing in the curriculum in the right order. And that's just not nice to spend as a parent with your kids. If you have the luxury to spend like 4 or 5 hours every day learning, and you got to spend it on going through a curriculum and force feeding your kid and really have all the
Horrible.
pressures like, oh, I'm so sorry, you have to do it because if you don't do that thing, you will not pass the exam. And then, you know what, the tragedy will happen. And maybe we get a divorce because everything doesn't work out as we plan to be. And that's really terrible. So I wouldn't advise for that. If you have this freedom, go for unschooling. Unschooling as the concept and learning is natural. You just be a good example in learning, help your kid, support it, but that you do, of course, if you love your children, help them be curious people. And then the main issue is really good learning experience, in particular the social learning experiences, because most other kids are shut away in the institution. So that's difficult. If you're doing unschooling, get access to other kids. And that was the inspiration for our project I started. I think it will come out of hubs of location independent parents that spend time together with other families and have economies of scale in providing just good learning opportunities for the free roaming children and have a place that's safe enough, and sound enough, and healthy enough for for kids just to free roam without the helicopter parents always watching after them. So it's a kind of natural learning environment I would think about. That's the most conducive. And of course, it's also about the comfort for the parents. You should be able to not to be present for your kids when they need you, but not have to constantly make sure that they are safe and everything works and you have to watch everything. But you should be able to pursue your work. And usually, if kids are in a good environment, they'll take care of themselves.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you can afford if it's lots of families, you could afford people helping you in that providing. And if a kid gets bored, if that really happens with other kids around, to just have good learning ideas, opportunities, experiments, experiences, games available to do so. And of course, interesting technologies to try out, hackerspace, a garden, and any kind of stuff, access to nature, access to sports. That are important
Totally.
for kids.
Do you think that's because I think it's possible also, online to probably a combination of both, right? Online, offline, especially in the younger years. And I don't think, a child like, under 10 needs to be studying for 5 hours a day. I don't think they need that much, right? Like, I think it's just like you described before. I think it's more play, right? They learn through play. And then after it changes, right? So the hubs that you talked about, that's mostly focused on offline
Yes.
kind of setups. Yeah,
Yes,
interesting. Because yeah,
but of course friendly to technology.
yeah,
And there is one issue, and you kind of mentioned it right now, is some parents care about accredited education. I would not recommend doing that, but some parents really want to be able to anyway change this lifestyle and go back into schools. And that's where you have to compromise, that you can be much more efficient than public schools and you'll use technology. So there are quite a few ventures doing that. And maybe if really lots of parents demand that, I wouldn't recommend it. I think that's a compromise you can go for. Then you use technologies and then it's more digital. Because only with this kind of technology you can adapt it to the individual learning speed and needs. So there'll be large language model based learning, and it can be online. It doesn't have to be online. Usually, if you don't have kids around, then it can be an online experience. Like the Elon Musk inspired school came up with the synthesis thing, which is groups over the internet coming together for like guided games that have didactic approach, pedagogic approach, and help groups solve problems and learn this way. That's nice. I think it's only part of it. And anyway, those digital screens are very tempting. So I think most parents would care to have meaningful offline experiences. And of course, our life is offline, or should be offline in large parts, the family life. Because if you're a family, you shouldn't need to get together online to meet or schedule a Zoom call. And so I think that's the way to look about it. But technologies are, of course, much more efficient than teachers. Like someone standing on a blackboard. What a crazy idea. You can record any lecture available and you still have kids like sit in and listen. At universities, it's the same. It's really crazy. There a lot can be improved. If you want to have a curriculum and you think your kids have to go for something, either because you want to have them accredited or you really believe that they won't do the right amount of work in subjects, then I think it takes about 4 hours a day if you use good technology and learning groups to master any kind of curriculum. And usually you'd outcompete any school because that's, of course, the speed is given by the slowest student. And there, if it's individualized, you're much more efficient there. But it's not really the meaningful learning experience I'd recommend.
Yeah. I think it's also, there's no distractions, right? Because like if you think back, what was school all about? It was just about, like everything else, but like the subjects in front, right? So yeah, I think it's definitely more efficient. And I think, I'm not sure, I have to see, right? I'm not sure if you have more experience with that. Maybe 4 hours is the way to go, but maybe also, we have to get away from this thought, that kids have to know everything, right? I'm sure there's a healthy base layer of all these topics out there, right? But like, you don't have to, distract them with all these different types of topics all the time, right? Like, let them zone in on something for a while and see,
Yeah.
how deep they want to go. And I think that's like way more interesting to a child's mind, right? Like, you see them play with the certain thing out there that you give it to them for like for 2 years, and then they put it away, then they pick it up again, right? And that, I think, for me, was also a problem with school, because you didn't even have the possibility to basically excel at a certain topic. They just
Yeah.
didn't give you the time, right? And so you have all these issues come up, especially for us men, right? Like, we don't feel we're worth anything, right? Because we're not good at something. Like, we compare each other, right? Like, especially at that age, and later on, sure, as well. But like, we're not good at anything, and then we're just in this fearful state about that next exam all the time,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh shit, now I have to do this again. And like, you don't even like,
Yeah.
sit down for a moment and think, right? It's just like learning by heart, forgetting, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's,
No,
it's a
it's
horrible
becoming
cycle.
absurd now, of course,
Yeah.
with the large language models.
Yeah.
It will reveal the utter stupidity and even criminal stupidity in education. And I've been teaching at universities for a long time, and it's really absurd there. You can write and grade any university exam by using a large language model. So what they told me at university as a professor is that, okay, now the way we cope with that is in grading, not just look at the results, but we have to take into account other factors, which is like turning it absurd. It's like, hey, it actually doesn't matter. We can't tell. So let's figure out a way to still pretend that we are grading young persons for whatever crazy thing that we can come up with. And basically, it's usually then obedience to the structures. It's like,
Wow,
are
that's
they good
insane.
at group work? And stuff like that. Do they ask the right woke questions during class?
Wow.
And it's disgustingly stupid.
That was one of the reasons, because I left Germany after 10th grade, and then went to the
Good choice.
UK and finished school there, because like, I had these teachers that just wouldn't like me, because I asked questions, and then I would
Yeah.
get bad grades, right? So now you're again like moving into that sphere, right,
Yes,
where it's
exactly.
all about personal preference. Like, do I
Yeah.
like this guy? Is he actually
Yeah.
obeying my rules, or is he stirring up the class and like asking all these weird questions about history and stuff? Why doesn't this add up? Why doesn't that
Yeah.
add up? Right? Like, he's uncomfortable, and now I'm going to give him the bad grade because of that. And that's where you kill the entrepreneurial mindset. That's where you kill curiosity in any child, right? Like, that's just the basic problem I see with all these institutions. And so, for me, homeschooling, just to get back to that, is not, just that thing that where, like, you as a parent to teach your kid like all day, right? That's not my understanding of it. For me, it means more like, and you as a parent have to understand what you're shit at, how much time you can invest in that, and then get the help and everything else, right? Like, so I think that it could be a cool combination of offline, online, right? I also talked to a guy from the States, and he's doing a program called Apogee. I don't know if you know it. I can send you some info on that. And they're basically doing that as well. They're building these schools, these independent schools, but with a different curriculum. They're getting experts in, also jujitsu, martial arts, right? Any subject that's could be interesting to a child. They get them in, and they're like actually, practicing what they preach, right? Like, it's a very practical approach, and much less of that school system that exists, as of now.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of alternative schools, that for sure. The issue is always how many parents are around that are like-minded. And then you can have a selection effect. So in many
Yeah.
big cities in Germany and Austria, like the alternative schools attract a certain group of parents. They can be the wealthier parents. So there's one selective pressure. This is not always the best one, depending on the structure of the wealth in the society. And then the other one is being very alternative because you're on the fringe. You have like esoteric leanings, which can be good, but can make life very difficult if different
Yeah,
parents basically follow their own private religions with their own
sure.
private laws. So, then it becomes almost impossible to have like good food for the kids because no one would agree, and it'll be just usually then just noodles as the
Yeah,
base layer agreement with kind of some kind of vegetable sauce on top, and still you have to put in lots of effort and money to make that work. So it's not obvious there was an alternative school is the better option. So I'd be pragmatic about that. You have to like really care about your kids and see how they fare. At sometimes, at some ages, and some kids can do well in public schools. It all depends on the teachers and the group of parents that are living in your neighborhood or in the neighborhood that attracts the school. I wouldn't want to take my kids an hour a day in the car to just drive them to kind of some alternative learning
yeah,
experience. That usually also wouldn't be worth it because it's all a trade-off. I mean, if I have to spend the time extra, the kids could just be at home. And so they take time if they are alone, if it's a single kid, and if it's two kids or a few kids, they take more time from you as a parents. They'll disturb you. They come up with questions, which is great, or want to play, or something else. But if you have a group of kids, usually that does not arise. It just needs a few kids in the neighborhood that are also not in school. That's why I think and that would be my approach, not start with like the great alternative school where you don't know the constituency of people you'd attract at a certain location, because it's still location dependent and location based, and then it's a market kind of offer, and it's a terrible market because you are outcompeted by the for free options, and then you need to get an accreditation. Usually that means that weight cost that you have to push on to the parents. So the parents pay twice. They pay through the taxes and they pay the extra for the alternative education, and usually got help in the school as well, and stuff like that. So I think one has to be pragmatic about that and not overrate education too much. You can't do it even if you have the best teachers. It all depends on the kids if they are ready to get that. And usually the best thing you can look for really is it works like a kindergarten. It's like the kids are happy to be there. They play, and you for a few hours can go on with like concentrated deep work because you don't have to be there for your kids. And it's okay to not always 100% be there for your kids. That's also important
sure.
for them. So I think it's first about having the right parents closer together, and then figuring out what you can offer and provide for that group of parents, rather than now using digital options. I'd be very skeptical if you introduce extra screen time
Yeah,
just because you think, oh, we got to do something educational. No, I mean,
that's
are you
always
using it as a
tricky.
tool or
Yeah,
to keep
distraction.
your kids attracted, or go for a curriculum? Those are the worst reasons.
Yeah, yeah. I think screen time is a tough one. I just don't see any, any good thing about it. Like if it has to be about, education, maybe an hour a day or so, I don't know, I could think about it, right? But anything else is just so, I just see it, how addictive it is,
Yeah.
right? Like even my newborn, he just looks at the screen. Like he cannot even talk and he's already seeing
Yeah.
the screen. It's like
Yeah.
mesmerizing. It's like a magnet,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I don't know. I think it's a cool topic, and that program that I said mentioned before, and that works in the United States, right? Like it's in the United States. It's different.
Yeah.
You have all these states,
Yeah.
that they're all a bit different, but like you can make one product work in all of them if you just tweak it a little bit, right? And people are used to driving,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
it's like if you're in Texas
Yes.
and stuff, it's normal to go for an hour, it's like,
Yeah.
so it's different. And I talked to them a bit, and I thought about if it would be possible here in Europe, but it's definitely not. It's impossible to build this here,
Yeah.
especially in Western Europe. Forget about it. All EU countries, more or less, also impossible. But yeah, I'm let's talk about AI a bit, because I know you think about these topics as well, and it obviously it takes care of a lot of bullshit tasks, right, at the moment. And do you see, like, where do you see this going at this moment? And do you see any dangers with it? Like, what's your whole take on that niche?
It's overrated in the short run. So there is some hype, and I think we'll see some corrections, and it'll take longer than expected to see really a change of the production structure. But it's underrated in the long term. So I think we'll see really a profound change of production. I tend to be optimistic in the long run. I was tending to be a more technology friendly, technology optimist side, just from the study of history. That sometimes technology is the only hope, even if it's like it serves bad ends. It changes society so much, and it brings new chances, because every society can be plundered by its own institutions and abused by its own institutions. So without that shake up by new technologies, there wouldn't be much progress. I think that's also a kind of evolutionary thing, that we want to bring it all back to our controllable small tribe, that's linked to our evolutionary background. That there was an insight of members of the Austrian school that there's really a big issue here. So that's why technology is important. It shakes up societies, and it confronts us with a stronger reality than our own wishes and plans. So that's good about the large language models. I see impressive progress there. I mean, who hasn't been impressed hasn't really watched closely, but impressed on the kind of understanding of intelligence, maybe. And that was a very unlikely premise, that you could really just scale up these kind of weighted learnings and then come up with really qualitatively surprising answers, where it's not just mirroring. Now with the latest model, or the O1, with the reasoning within, we see, okay, it's of course repeating is a kind of mirroring, is pattern matching. But then if the reasoning structures can be patterned and you can apply those patterns, it doesn't seem to be too different from how our brain is working. We understand that much better now, and I see close links between the understanding of the neural landscape and how this mapping works, and how we always come up with models that are then like refuted by the world, or and the large language models. So it makes sense in retrospect that has proved to be quite successful in even coming up with modes of reasoning. But the challenge is, as we always are with human beings, so that's the biggest danger here. And the obvious one is using bad guys using it for bad means, bad ends, and it always happens. But then I'm equally afraid of the good guys who think they are the good guys and claim to be the good guys, and they want to save you and protect you. And that can be worse. And I think in the EU, it's more of that kind of thing. I'm much more afraid of the AI sensors than of AI, and we're seeing that already. Right? They try everything to like have the models have the right spin in the answers to keep us safe from thought crimes and so on. And that's really the worst part of the large language models, is how human beings cope with it, react to it. I mentioned a bit the stupid reactions at the university I see, and all kind of ridiculousness that will happen. And as always, all the wrong conclusions will be drawn. It'll be politicians that claim, okay, now we have no alternative but printing money to keep everyone fed, because no one can contribute in a meaningful way anymore. And it's just they're like dystopia that just serves their interest. And that would be the worst possible take. It's in the opposite. Now you have to like focus on the things that make human beings unique. There's this creativity and bring things together, entrepreneurship, coping with uncertainty, innovation, doing things differently, and all. It's actually the bullshit jobs, of course, that are replaced by the large language, or could be replaced. They are not replaced because, of course, their reason is not that they fulfill any needs. It's just that they are there because the interest groups provide them, and that you can see. And that's why I think it's a bit overrated in the short run. So those people will have less work, but they won't have less jobs for a foreseeable future. But it will become ever more ridiculous and clownesque. You have to deal with those people that are not productive in any way. And I have started communicating to those kind of people through large language models, which if a bureaucrat asks me something, he has a form to fill out, I just communicate using large language models. And that's the only way they really increased my productivity so far. It's the bots communicate to the human bots, the non-player characters that are out there. And that
And they don't
works
even know
really
that
well.
they are.
They don't know, yeah.
They don't know. Yeah, and that's what's kind of frightening to me. Also what you said before, like these people that think they're doing good because they've grown up through that system that they don't even have any correct discernment anymore, right? Like they have no idea how they're operating. They have no idea that they're just chicken, this NPC chicken, just like running through life, like in this linear way, where the machine is always operating in the same kind of frequency, and it's just it's just mind-boggling sometimes. And that's why I think if you want different children, you have to give them the space to think differently, right? And if you surround them with like parents, or like the kids that have these types of parents, it will trickle down to them. It will affect them, right?
Yeah.
So I think even though there's dangers with like secluding them from this, this normal life, I think it's still the right thing to do, especially because of this topic, right?
Yeah, that's a trade-off. Just make
Yeah.
sure. I think I totally agree. The biggest danger is the peer group, and it's like other parents coming through the kids, and then you have like if it's the same age in artificial surrounding, kids tend to imitate even more or have that kind of toxic social behavior you see in prisons, like mobbing and so on. So it's using pressure to make others conform or just being like-minded enough and brainwashed enough to make everyone conform. That's a big danger. Of course, there's also a danger, of course, always in secluding and stepping outside of society. So I think that's a choice you have to do as a parent and make sure how do you keep your kids not only safe but keep them flourishing as well. And sometimes neighborhoods are okay. You can change your life by changing the neighborhood. You can change maybe by changing the school, or sometimes if you have to withdraw from your neighborhood, it could be a sign that you are in the wrong location. And if you're location independent and it's not a really good reason to be there, I don't see why you shouldn't look out different places that have a better trade of safety versus flourishing.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe that's a good segue to talk about Zeddies, because I know that you're into these topics as well, and not a lot of people are. So I'd like to take the conversation there. When did you first start thinking about these types of solutions? Because that's always interesting to me to talk about solutions, right? Like we talk about theories a lot, and we just go back and forth. But like we need solutions. We need to think about them. We need to converse. We need to discuss. And so, when did that come to mind? And what are some of the solutions that are already working? Because there's some in Central America. There's some here close to me in Montenegro and stuff like that. Are there some that you want to talk about that do a particularly good job? And let's go there.
Yes, I was very, very early to that space. I was very early to Bitcoin, and those are linked. And it's no surprise that in the book, The Sovereign Individual, I mentioned it's both kind of prophecy about Bitcoin, but also prophecy about how this increased location independence will lead to new structures and political structures. And it's because this practical side of the Austrian school, which is a bit overseen, has been onto these questions for a long time, a really long time, and has been spot on some aspects and developments. So one way this location independence, of course, changed the world is that we had new hubs emerge in very short time without many people realizing it. And some of those were remainders of the last centralized empire, the British Empire. that when it came down, some remaining hubs could reconnect to the post-war globalized order, and in particular thinking about Singapore and the Emirates. And what they figured out is that just being a hub in a network is the better thing to play, and a node has to be open in a sense, and it has to be stable. And they combined this kind of stability with openness, and figured out that if you're a small space, you have to be attractive to people and capital coming in. And then it's better to select the rules on that, what rules work, other than just imposing your ideas as you would do in a big nation state. Usually it's like politicians think, okay, now we got to design. It's like we choose the rules for everyone to follow, and that's how we shape reality. And there's this idea of the Austrian school that there's, in the long run, economics is more powerful than power itself, the capacity to like construct, design, organize. And this economic reality comes bottom up. It's from the cooperation and feedback of people interacting. And that we've seen in these hubs. It seemed to most people a miracle, this wealth explosion after the war, and some not equally distributed, but still impressive. To the Austrian school, it's not a miracle, just kind of flourishing if people are able to build up wealth, invest, take entrepreneurial decisions, say no to wrong production, wrong decisions, and move accordingly, and move their capital, and move physically. And that we've seen in Hong Kong, Singapore, and then the Chinese miracle, of course, is mostly around copying the openness of Singapore. So it was Singapore inspired the Chinese miracle, and it started with the big cities, Shenzhen, Shanghai, and so on. And now it's gone, unfortunately, in the backward direction. But fortunately, other places have come up to the task. It's cities in Southeast Asia and the Emirates. And the thing here is that people realized that you have to figure out a good rule set. And about rules is basically you want to have stability in the sense that it's not arbitrary. And you think that if there's a conflict, there'd be a judgment that's fair for both sides. So what the Emirates did is come up with this, or develop on the special administrative zone. So you don't have the same law for a country. It's you have zones with particular rule sets that can be more open, and there you can experiment. And that's also the idea behind the Chinese miracle, the Asian miracle, every kind of miracle. It's just figuring out we can't have a one-size-fits-all top-down solution. As we got the experiments with rule sets and then open up. And if you're in a bad location because it hasn't developed yet, you have to offer an upside, and that can be lower or no taxes, that can be lower or no customs, but also it's the kind of stability, lack of corruption, and good sound rules that basically are commercial rules that are ages old and are not the invention of a particular person, but a discovery of market participants. You have been dealing with contracts, and then what kind of issues arise. So that's the concept of a special administrative zone. And then in Spanish, then what's called the Zeddies in the Honduras experiment. The approach there chosen was, could you get a country that's eager enough for development and outside investment that it would, by constitutional law, guarantee particular areas of the country to have their own rules? Not because you want to have a small dictator somewhere who experiments, but really because you want to convince investors to trust the location. And who would go to, pardon my French, a shithole country where any year anything can change, and you basically can't do business there. You can only do the small scale retail business that we see in all the underdeveloped countries. But really build up capital structure needs sound rules that make sense and are not expropriatory. Rules for plundering or are not taken seriously at all. The problem, of course, with that approach is it needs politicians to agree on something, and then you got to figure out a way how can you protect that constitutional law? And that's why I think, but constitutional, of course, all those constitutions are fictions as well. You play with that, you play with investor protection, but basically it's just bringing this idea: a country doesn't have to reform 100%. You can't turn Honduras into Singapore overnight. It's just impossible from the culture, the people, and the people wouldn't like it. So why not use some parts of the country that either are fit because they have a lot of outside relations already, tourist places that don't feel that authentic anymore anyway. So you could be more open with for foreigners, because the downside, of course, with Dubai, for example, is it's mostly foreigners. But that's great. I mean, Dubai is one of the greatest cities of today with all its downsides. It's just, it attracts the right kind of people. It attracts entrepreneurs. It's very dynamic, and it has reinvented itself many times only because they could let go and say, okay, we can't control in an identitarian way that everyone now follows Sharia, comes there, and everyone wears the same costume. It's that openness, and that's a trade-off. So it's either places in a country that are already open to tourists, or it's places that are very very shitty, that just lack security, where no one would move to and invest in, where say, okay, there is no downside. It's hell. So what's the upside? We can experiment, but don't have to change every law all at once, which tends to be tricky and takes a lot of pressure. I mean, in Argentina, it was like 20 years ago when I spent there a lot of time, people were already so fed up with politics, and everyone was like saying, oh, the politics should leave. And now 20 years later, finally, they like let a seemingly non-politician go to power and try out some of this radical stuff. I mean, I'm ambivalent. I won't trust politics too much. Is always too much top down. But also in El Salvador, for example, it's like the murder capital of the world. When there is enough pressure, sometimes that opens up for political reform, but it tends to be overrated. It doesn't tend to be that's sustainable in the long run if it comes top down, if it's not a gradual process. So I think this SEDA, special economic zone, special administrative zone approach could be a way to have a more bottom-up exploration. But I've been humbled by the experiences so far. A lot of things can go wrong. You get a lot of opposition. And what's really bad in Honduras, you get like people in the country getting this political narrative, oh, those are the outside enemies coming in and want to take away our land and stuff like that. So I'm not that hopeful in the short term for those kind of approaches. I think it'll come more from like gradual opening up of places that are small enough not to make anyone afraid, and then just use good political circumstances that can shift and that are quite uncertain. So I think it's we cannot focus on one location. I think it's impossible now to build a utopia in one location, because then you're location dependent, and then you depend so much on the politicians there. If all your hope, all your investment goes into one location, there's a lot to take, a lot to plunder. So I think it's still, the approach would be more location independent and making best use, and geo arbitrage is the term, is making best use of the differences in different locations.
Interesting. Yeah, I've talked to a guy that's building something in Portugal. It's big enough. It's a couple 100 hectares, and my problem with these locations is that you will get to this point where there's a couple people that try to pull the strings and try to navigate, right? And as people evolve, right, and weak minds are being corrupted by power in the end, right? So you will always get to this point where it gets to like a critical mass where you will have these issues, right? Because either you have someone that's then being named a dictator, right, because he's kind of deciding top down, or you will have a group of people that will start to pull into different directions, right?
Yeah, because if we tend to do it intuitively the political way, it's like we
Yes.
gotta have one decision maker. I would go do it the economic way, and that's rather through a company that's providing a service, or people voluntarily cooperating. And there's the dangers, like the small scale politics is commune building. which just doesn't work out. I mean, almost everyone longs for his tribe. But then we'll figure out when we get together, oh, we are actually different, and it's the Euro phenomenon. Then it's like we have to pull on the same thing. So most communes don't work. They have a higher failure rate than startups, even, which is ridiculously high. So when I hear someone who wants to start a commune on some common ground, I know immediately that the likelihood of it being in any achieving anything meaningful are just too slow, too small. And then there's the big scale politics. It's like, oh, we got to negotiate with all those politicians and we got to bring billions in investment kind of thing, which also has quite bad incentives, I'm afraid. So I'm looking for a more natural, decentralized way of discovering new locations, new way of lives, and then provide services that are linked to that, and not have it as organized projects in a sense. So the great thing about Bitcoin is it's a decentralized protocol, and not the Bitcoin CEO telling us how to use it.
Yeah. What do you think? Who came up with it? What's your thesis?
About what?
Who do you think came up with Bitcoin?
Who came up with?
Like, what's your?
I have my suspicions, but I think it's fundamentally in our interest to appreciate this immense achievement of Satoshi, that we can't be sure who it is, and it's part of course, Bitcoin, the first biggest achievement, and then the second most important achievement is that we can't be sure who Satoshi is. So we are all Satoshi. It could be you, it could be me.
Okay. Yeah, so not all eggs in one basket, for sure. You're also an investor, so what are you kind of interested in? What are some thoughts that you have these days? Like, which niches do you think about? What do you invest in? What are you invested in?
Yeah. I try to use Bitcoin as a collateral. I think it's a great collateral. I think it's unfortunate that banks and regulators don't see it that way yet. So I'm not. I think there is room for credit in a society, and in particular, of course, we now have the issue. As an investor, you have to be a bit pragmatic because we're in a fiat world, and you need fiat liquidity for things, and also for production structures and investments. So what I try to do is do as much investment as possible with selling the least Bitcoin possible and increase the long-term value of a capital structure. And that's why I'm investing in locations for location independent people and try to contribute to that. Like, how can we bring the decentralization of the monetary protocol to a more lifestyle layer of decentralized structures, decentralized living? So that's either technology, new means to help with decentralized communication, interaction, and then also physical location, which is basically real estate. Try to make real estate work in a more decentralized way, take away the pain and fiat aspects of real estate, and just reinterpret it as physical locations for physical people that have families and that want to flourish in a real world and not in a VR, AR world.
Do you think we own these locations, let's say in European countries, as long as we pay tax on that? Like, what's your take on that?
You have to be pragmatic. It's all trade-offs. I wouldn't recommend to seek utopias. It's the perfect solution. That can be quite dangerous if you have family or cultural attachment or friends or a language that binds you to a continent. I think it's never a good idea to be a martyr for something. So I would never remain in a place to defend it in war. I mean, that may seem or not in a nation state to defend a nation state. Of course, I defend my family, and I maybe even defend a neighborhood or community that I feel very fond of, and I'm not against defense, of course, per se. That's quite important. The defense technology, also from an investment point of view, interesting and important. But as long as you don't have to be a martyr and you see it as a trade-off, and sometimes you have to pay a local mafia something, and you say, okay, that's the downside of the place. And now there are upsides as well. I think it's better to be productive in society. So I would not recommend that anyone who has the capacity to be productive to retire into a forest or something. and just let go of society. That would be too bad. We need you, and we need everyone to contribute in a productive way. And sometimes, and for a while, these ways will need network effects. You need access to other collaborators. I mean, the amount of physical travel you have to do goes down, but still it has not disappeared. Even after the pandemic, something has gone back. There has never been as much travel as today. So we still are physical people. The VR idea has not worked out so far. I mean, it may change when large language models help us discover how we can better control physical reality. That's the enactor side, the activators, sensors, and stuff. But for now, there are trade-offs to be made. And you may have parents that you have to look out for. You may think that the culture is important, and then of course it can be for different life phases. It can be different locations. So I've chosen Switzerland for now in a compromise with my wife. As a like high comfort, very expensive, comfortable location, which is safe enough, sound enough, has enough good people, quality people, to make it worthwhile for now. The tendencies are bad as everywhere in Europe. It's not as dynamic anymore. It's much more dynamic than Austria or Germany, much more positive than Austria and Germany, but has big issues, of course, as well. And it's a very subjective, I think, decision to make. If my internet opinions would matter more to me, probably I'd go elsewhere, because Switzerland also has started to like follow that woke European pattern of trying to censor opinions. And even if I don't agree with them, it's just a no-go, but I don't care about all my opinions. So I'm okay for now. And the kind of trade-off you take, there are taxes to be paid in Switzerland. I've chosen the canton with the least of that. Still, it's too much. I think it's too much of a hassle. It's too bureaucratic. But still, that's trade-offs. So I think it's great. I mean, that's one of the insights of Austrian economics. It's all trade-offs. It's all opportunity costs. I mean, you got to decide under uncertainty. Don't think that you can avoid a decision by thinking about utopia, dreaming about a utopia. That just doesn't work. It's the real world. It's now. You are now in a location. You now have capital. What are you doing with that? And part of your capital is, of course, the people you know, the surroundings you know, that you don't have to rediscover and explore the culture, the language, anything that helps you be a productive person and not be a daydreamer or LARPer. That wouldn't really help anyone. And I think that's a risk today. We see the failing institutions. The new options are not really that visible yet in our discovery procedure. So let's not just LARP. Let's take a decision in the here and now. And that may be a commitment. So there are reasons to commit to Europe still. I wouldn't overcommit. So I'm still interested. I see more interesting parts outside of Europe. I'm attached to the culture and history of Europe. I'm attached to the people here. I want to be close to Europe for a foreseeable future. I wouldn't be here and during a world war situation like that. I think I don't owe anyone to protect failing structures. I have been warning about for a long time, and then I think the mobility is really better. But don't write it up. I think the good thing about Switzerland is that it's slow. So it can learn from other countries failing, and that could be at the fringes of Europe. So I think the UK is in a worse shape than most parts of Europe, but maybe sometime in 5-10 years, the pressure could be so strong that finally the UK wakes up and opens up to port cities, this idea they already had after Brexit. So that's special economic zones, again, opening up to Asia and just solve their own issues. And that we can see in parts of Europe already that are still dynamic, unfortunately now encumbered by this terrible war. Poland is one of the most dynamic places, for example. And then upcoming new borderline states, islands surrounding Europe, anything that could take advantage of that really dense concentration of people still, of capital, of culture. So I think it will remain relevant if you have a cultural link to Europe. And I wouldn't now go to New Zealand or any place where I'm so far away that I would have to cut all the links to Europe.
Yeah, yeah, and I don't think there's that much, working in their favor there either. Like especially Australia and New Zealand. I think it's like
Yeah.
we saw during the pandemic. What went on there. It's like I think it's a tough spot to be in. But to get back to the UK, I mean, London is a special because London City is a special economic zone, right? Most people don't know that, right? Like it's kind of
Yeah.
secluded from the UK, so they've always played that role. They've always played that game, but just more in the background. And you have all these, these islands and the channel,
Yeah.
like Stark and whatnot, right? But
Yes.
like, who
Sorry.
the hell, right? Like, who wants to live there? It's like I think that's a tough spot to choose, right? But because we talked about the city of London right now. Like, let's talk about currency a bit and fiat and currency has a shelf life, obviously, right? When we look at the graphs, the dollar, could be interesting in the next few years. What's going to happen there? Most people don't have a clue about Bretton Woods and any of these happenings, and they still trade their time for that piece of paper that's credit in the end, right? Like, how important do you think education in that sense would be? Because I always thought, you could like, open some eyes with that, but like most people are reluctant, like they don't even care about this, right? That as
Yes.
soon as they see, okay, shit, there's something that's kind of, shaking my foundation of knowledge, like I don't want to know this, right? Like that this goes too deep, right? And I just turn away and ignore that topic. Like,
Yeah.
do you think we can change anything in terms of education, or do most people have to learn the hard way because everyone's still trading their time for that piece of paper in the end, right?
Yeah, that's my bad news as an educator. Education is overrated.
Yeah.
That's just not how it works. You have to do your own learning. No one can do it for you. Sometimes people trust you enough, but that you have to earn. And even as a parent, it's hard to earn that your kids will trust you and not repeat the same errors you've made, as every generation has to repeat some of the errors again. As you have to find out and then to like teach an adult, a foreigner, and make him change. Yeah, it's basically impossible. So forget about, don't waste your time doing that. What you do is help the already, I mean, those who already know more or less discover the implications and maybe become a bit more self-conscious about some of their decisions and ideas they have in mind. Now, change usually comes from either reality or technology. It's like you offer a new means and people say, oh, it works out for you. It may work out for me as well. Or some other things are just failing and then people are really looking for alternatives. It's a kind of learning through pain or learning through a role model. And usually a role model is like using something that is better. That's a better way to achieve your own ends. And then I wouldn't assume all these mainstream adherence to just be, I mean, it's propaganda in the sense that you repeat it to yourself and you rationalize it, but it's not just irrational, it's interests as well. It's unfortunately in Western Europe, a large part of the population has an entrenched interest in the structures, in those unproductive structures. In Austria and Germany, more than 50% of the population are dependent on government handouts, net government handouts. So they get out more and they expect to get out more. Of course, in the long run, they get out less, but it's really hard to see. But in the short run, they are right. It serves their interests. They are just very short-term, stupid interests and very anti-social interests, even though they are old terms like social. It's very social, but it's the most anti-social, egoistic thing you can do. It's just you consume of the wealth of a society and feel good about it as well. So that's the worst kind of people. They not only take the money, they want to have the status as well. It's like feel good, or we are the good guys, and you draw a salary on being the good guy as well. That's really the worst kind of people, but it's in their interest. They don't want to have the eyes open of other people, and they'll fight you if you ask questions even. And so yeah, that's that's the issue here. How can you educate there? You can make it more transparent. You can highlight it sometimes, and that's what Hans Hoppe of the Austrian School says. He thinks the only task now of the educator is to ridiculize or reveal how ridiculous some ways are, and that you educate about how ridiculous those people and their models are. That's possible. My approach is a bit
Next generation.
different. I think it's fighting. You have to choose your fights,
Yeah.
and it's better to protect yourself and take your decisions than actively fight, because you don't enter a fight that you're going to lose. It just doesn't
Yeah.
make sense.
Yeah. I also think we can only educate, the next generation.
Yeah.
Like that's the only way. But let's get back to the currency. But like, what's your take on, fiat in these next, let's say, 10 years? Where's this going?
Right now the biggest issue is how the replacement of the dollar assets, and the politicization of the fiat structure through sanctions and geopolitics. So we're about to see a breakup in the world financial structure. And it's not yet obvious how it works out. We see the increased gold purchases. We see an increased role of Bitcoin. But we have also seen the very surprising emergence of shadow banking in the form of Tether. So it's dollar denominated crypto. And that's underrated, that very few people observe what's going on there. And there it's a fight gradually about the US. Either, I think they realized it's a kind of lifeline for the dollar. Tether is the biggest demand for dollar assets. And that's why it's paid heavily by the US government, lots of money. And yeah, that's. I think we see a gradual loss of importance of these dollar assets, which are mainly debt instruments. So it's not the physical dollars; they're not that relevant. It's the dollar-denominated debt instruments that have served as money. That's the base layer money. That's how you keep money if you have money. Most people don't have money. So if you have lots of money, you keep money in usually short-term dollar debt, US government debt. That's how you keep money. And if you need some interest, you have a longer term US government debt. And that has to be replaced gradually. And I think we're seeing Bitcoin take some of that replacement. We are seeing gold taking over some of that. And we may see other things. Not yet sure what in the stablecoin field. Now there's the big fight going on within regulation. And they're not regulating. There's a lot of pressure from the US on Switzerland to regulate Swiss franc stablecoins right now. So that's currently a battlefield that very few people are watching, and that's relevant. So the Swiss franc is our fiat currency that still could be a competitor to the dollar. I mean, so it's much smaller, but there's the franc. There's been such a lot of pressure on them that Swiss central bank has been one of the main buyers of US assets again. For a while, they were the biggest Meta shareholder, Facebook, which is crazy. But they just do it so to drive down the value of the franc, of the Swiss franc. And they're under a lot of pressure to do that because if such a small country like comes the refuge fiat place, then of course the exchange rate would go crazy. And then still it's a very export-oriented country, Switzerland. So that brings issues here. And all these issues we see appear, they were predictable. But how that plays out in the end, if we'll see like 2 blocks, 3 blocks emerge, what are the links between? That's all politics, basically. I mean, politicians deciding what do we go after now and what do we have to accept because it's in our interest. And they have to figure out, and it takes a while to figure out. It's really difficult to understand. And politics is always behind what's happening. So that's unfortunately makes it also for the economists very difficult to predict what's going on. But it's unfortunately a very interesting time.
Yeah, sometimes they're behind. Maybe that's on purpose. And sometimes you have like when you watch what I don't know, Nancy Pelosi is doing, what she is investing in, then she's very much at the forefront, right? So, like at some point it works, right? Like, it could work, right? They could actually, bring out legislation that actually makes sense, but I don't think that's in the interest of that whole apparatus that's behind that, right? And if it has to go fast, we saw that during COVID. If it has to go fast, then all of a sudden it goes really fast, like you can push through stuff in an expedited way all of a sudden,
Yeah.
right? It works. So yeah, it's just a big game that's being played, and we just have to play our part. And what next book? Are you writing something at the moment? Are you thinking about the
Well,
next
I'm,
book?
I'm supposed to, yeah. I'm not very productive in writing. I have two book projects, but I wouldn't overrate books. And it's already was not
Yeah.
only time missing, but also lack of motivation. The
Okay.
publishing house business model doesn't work really anymore. The book is
Yeah.
basically disappearing as a medium. So it becomes a merchandise article, more or
What about
less like.
Substack? Like, have you thought about just posting on Substack?
Yes, of course. I thought I've been writing a long time. It's always I'm not a content producer.
Yeah.
It's not my vocation, occupation, and of course, in these competitive times, you have to be a very consistent content producer, which for me would be a trade-off in doing less practical work that I think is more important for my learning and more transformative than having like the write
Posts.
another guy a book on Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I was a very early Bitcoin. I never did that, or write a newsletter on Bitcoin. I may take up writing more, but I've always chosen different formats, I don't think it's my occupation. I respect it. It's not my occupation to
Sure.
compete in that. Like, you have to compete with the algorithms, or you have to feed the algorithms to really have an impact. It's
I
not that
understand.
fun to put a lot of effort into it if you can scale it up and reach people. Then it's kind of notes, and then I think I'll do more consistent note keeping maybe in the future, but it'll all be a niche. Everything I do public facing has always been niche, and I'm happy about that because I don't get these issues of public debate and all the panic, and I don't have to be online all the time and watch who has reacted to what
Yeah.
now. And it's very self-selective. So people who discover me
Sure.
a small self-selected group of people. So I tend to have the best students, the best readers, the best collaborators imaginable.
Nice. So, what's your work with Scholarium? If you want to talk about it, but like, what are you doing there, and
Yeah, the
what's
public
your focus with
facing
it?
part is an educational program, digital for now since the pandemic, digital educational program for mainly adults who are interested in the original Austrian school, which for me is a very interdisciplinary, also practical oriented, or it also mixes practical ventures with theory. And that's a small guided study program to pursue only in German so far, because that's the original language, also the original writings. And then behind the scene is lots of projects, but very little of that public facing. Sometimes a venture emerges somewhere, but it's an educational company in the sense it's a learning company, Scholarium. That's why venture uniting people who are really interested in that old interdisciplinary tradition, which has a not so famous side with the practical side of it, in entrepreneurship, finance, investment, technology, and that was from the early Austrian school also an important branch that has arisen out of old Vienna, and then I try to continue in that tradition.
Okay, nice. What else is something that you would like to share that you work on? Like, where where's your thought capacity on a daily basis these days?
Yeah, well, I'm not watching or listening to podcasts. I'm reading mainly. So I think personally, I think you have one more focus on the educational sides of families. I know you brought that up. So I'd invite anyone who's interested to look at moving.school. And there's a form you can fill out for preferences. If there are any Bitcoiner families that have preferences alongside educational hubs or living hubs. That's one of the bigger projects I have, basically building Bitcoin citadels, bringing together Bitcoiners and then provide them with hubs for that are sustainable in the future and make best use of geo arbitrage possibilities. So that I'd recommend to check out or at least follow
Nice.
it.
Yeah, we'll link it in the show notes. Very cool. Yeah, that's also something I think about, especially since I have family. I think we have to think ahead. And that's also why I moved away from Germany, for the third time. But this is the last time and final time. And yeah, it's difficult to be in these countries for a long time, right? Especially when you've seen the developments recently, and especially when you think about school and when like just the amount of control they have, when you just want to homeschool your children, like you said, like they'll pick you up at some point. Just that thought, I think, should get people to think more deeply about these topics. But yeah, everyone has their own journey, right? So what can people find you if they want to get in contact with you or want to have more info?
The only social media I'm a bit more active on is X,
Mm-hmm.
formerly Twitter. So that's Colarium_AT. And then the website is colarium.at.
Okay.
People can drop their email there.
Sure. Perfect. Thank you for watching this episode to the end. If you got any value out of it, I'd love to invite you to, send it to a friend, leave a review or a thumbs up as well. This will help the channel a lot. I thank you for that. And I sincerely hope I'll see you on the next one.